The crystal chandelier cast fractured rainbows across the mahogany table as Eleanor Whitmore adjusted her Cartier bracelet with the precision of a surgeon. The private dining room at La Bernardine hummed with the kind of quiet that only money could buy. Thick velvet drapes muffling the city's chaos, Persian rugs swallowing footsteps, an air so pristine it seemed filtered through privilege itself. She glanced at her Patek Philippe l'arche, its diamond markers catching the light like tiny stars in a universe she owned. 20 minutes late, she murmured to her husband, Charles, whose silver hair was swept back in the style that had graced boardroom tables for 3 decades. I specifically requested 7 o'clock sharp. Charles barely looked up from his phone, where stock prices danced in green and red. Traffic, darling. Even the help can't control Manhattan at rush hour. The mahogany doors opened with a whisper, and their server entered. A young woman with chestnut hair pulled back in a neat bun, her black uniform pressed to perfection despite the humid August evening. She moved with quiet efficiency, her hands steady as she approached their table, a small notepad tucked discreetly in her apron pocket. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore. I'm Maya, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Her voice carried a slight accent, perhaps Mexican, Eleanor thought dismissively, but it was warm, professional. "Can I start you with something to drink?" Eleanor's eyes swept over the girl with the practiced assessment of someone who categorized people by their utility. Young, probably mid-20s, with those large brown eyes that suggested too much feeling, too much hope. The kind of girl who probably sent money home to family, who worked double shifts and dreamed of better things. How tediously predictable. "We'll have the Dom Perignon 2012, Eleanor said, not bothering to look at Maya directly. "And make sure it's properly chilled. The last time we were here, the champagne was practically room temperature." "Of course, ma'am. I'll have that right out for you." As Maya turned to leave, Eleanor called after her. "Oh, and dear, when you bring it, do try not to let the bottle drip on the table. This tablecloth is Italian lace, and the water spots are so unsightly." Maya paused, her shoulders tensing almost imperceptibly. "Absolutely, Mrs. Whitmore. I'll be very careful." The doors closed behind her, and Eleanor smiled that particular smile she reserved for moments when the natural order of things was properly maintained. Before we continue with what happens next, if you're enjoying this story of unexpected twists and life-changing revelations, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring you more stories like this one. Now let's see how this evening unfolds. Charles looked up from his phone, his pale blue eyes, the same eyes that had intimidated corporate boards and impressed society pages, focusing on his wife with something approaching amusement. "You know, Eleanor, sometimes I think you enjoy that a bit too much." "Enjoy what? Ensuring proper service? We're paying $800 for this meal, Charles. The least we can expect is competence." Through the tall windows, the lights of Manhattan twinkled like earthbound stars. This was their city, their world, a realm of private clubs and charity galas, of names etched on hospital wings and museum plaques. Eleanor had been born into this stratosphere, the daughter of a railroad fortune that had grown into telecommunications, then tech, adapting and multiplying across generations. Charles had earned his place through mergers and acquisitions, building an empire of commercial real estate that stretched from coast to coast. Their son Michael had been raised to inherit this kingdom. Private schools, Ivy League education, summers in the Hamptons and winters in Aspen. He'd been groomed from childhood to understand that their family existed above the ordinary struggles of ordinary people, which made his recent behavior all the more bewildering. I still don't understand why he won't tell us where he's been. 3 months, Charles. 3 months of radio silence, and then suddenly he wants to have dinner to share some news. What kind of news requires such dramatics? Charles set his phone aside, his attention finally fully present. At 63, he still carried the commanding presence that had made him one of New York's most feared negotiators. He's 28, Eleanor. Perhaps he's finally ready to settle down. God knows we've introduced him to enough suitable girls. The doors opened again, and Maya returned with the champagne, moving with that same quiet grace. She presented the bottle to Charles with proper ceremony, waiting for his nod before beginning to uncork it. The pop was barely audible, a soft exhalation of celebration contained within civilized bounds. As Maya poured, Eleanor watched her hands, steady, sure, no tremor despite the obvious nervousness that flickered occasionally in her dark eyes. There was something about this girl that nagged at Eleanor, some quality that didn't quite fit her preconceptions. The way she moved suggested education, perhaps even refinement, carefully hidden beneath the uniform of service. "Tell me, dear," Eleanor asked as Maya finished pouring, "how long have you been working here?" "About 6 months, Mrs. Whitmore." "And before that?" Maya hesitated, just for a moment. "I was finishing my master's degree." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Master's degree? In what?" "Art history, from Columbia, ma'am, with a focus on Renaissance studies." The silence stretched between them, filled with implications and reassessments. Eleanor felt a flicker of something, not quite anger, but a kind of territorial irritation. Here was a girl who should have been safely categorized, neatly filed away in Eleanor's mental taxonomy of the help. But Columbia? Art history? These were credentials that belonged to their world, not to someone serving champagne in a restaurant. "How interesting," Eleanor said, finally, her voice carrying just enough ice to reestablish the proper boundaries. "I suppose the job market is rather challenging these days, even for the educated." Maya's cheeks flushed slightly, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, ma'am, it can be." "Well," Eleanor continued, warming to her theme, "I'm sure you'll find something more suitable eventually. Perhaps a museum gift shop or tour guide work. Something more appropriate to your background." The words hung in the air like smoke from an expensive cigar, elegant and toxic. Maya's grip on the champagne bottle tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her professional composure. "Thank you for the suggestion, Mrs. Whitmore. Would you like me to tell you about tonight's specials?" As Maya began describing the evening's offerings, duck breast with cherry gastrique, seared Chilean sea bass, risotto with truffle oil, Eleanor found herself studying the girl more carefully. There was something in her bearing, in the way she held herself, that spoke of more than just education. There was dignity there, a kind of quiet strength that refused to be diminished by condescension. It was irritating. The doors opened a third time, and Eleanor looked up expectantly, assuming it was their son finally arriving. Instead, it was the restaurant sommelier, a distinguished gentleman with silver at his temples who moved with the confident grace of someone who had spent decades perfecting his craft. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Whitmore, I'm James Hartwell. I wanted to personally ensure your evening is perfect. I understand your son will be joining you shortly?" "Yes," Charles replied, though shortly seems to be a relative term where Michael is concerned. James smiled diplomatically. Traffic in the city can be unpredictable. "In the meantime, might I suggest some appetizers? The oysters are particularly exceptional tonight, flown in fresh from Prince Edward Island this morning." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "We'll wait for Michael, though I suppose we could have something light. What do you think, Maya? What would you recommend for people who can actually afford to eat here regularly?" The barb hit its mark.
Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but when she spoke, her voice remained professional. "The oysters are excellent, as Mr. Hartwell mentioned, or perhaps the tuna tartare. It's prepared tableside and quite beautiful." "Beautiful," Eleanor repeated, as if tasting the word. "How important is beauty in your life, dear? I imagine when one is struggling to pay rent, aesthetics become rather secondary." Maya's dark eyes met Eleanor's for just a moment, and in that instant, Eleanor saw something that surprised her. Not the wounded humility she'd expected, not the desperate gratitude of someone dependent on tips and good reviews. Instead, she saw a flash of something that looked almost like pity. Before Eleanor could process this fully, the doors burst open with more energy than the restaurant typically allowed. Michael Whitmore strode in, and Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Her son, her beautiful, privileged, perfectly groomed son, looked different. His usually immaculate hair was slightly tousled, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. But more than that, there was something in his expression, a kind of radiant happiness that Eleanor hadn't seen since he was a child. "Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry I'm late. Traffic was impossible and I had to—" He stopped mid-sentence as his eyes fell on Maya, and Eleanor watched in shock as her son's face transformed. The happiness she'd noticed became something deeper, more profound. It was the look of a man seeing his entire world in a single person. "Maya!" he breathed, and there was such tenderness in that one word that Eleanor felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. Maya turned toward him, and Eleanor watched as the professional mask slipped from her face, replaced by a smile so radiant that it seemed to light up the entire room. "Michael," she whispered, and in that whisper was everything Eleanor had been blind to see.
I don't understand," Charles said slowly, looking between his son and their server. "Do you two know each other?" Michael moved toward Maya, and Eleanor watched in growing horror as he took her hands in his, as if she were made of spun glass and dreams. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice shaking slightly with emotion, "I'd like you to meet Maya Rodriguez Whitmore, my wife." The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. Eleanor felt as if the world had tilted on its axis, as if gravity had suddenly reversed and sent her spinning into a reality she couldn't comprehend. The champagne glass in her hand began to tremble, sending tiny ripples across the golden surface of the Dom Perignon. "You're what?" she whispered, the word scraping against her throat like broken glass. Maya's left hand, which had been hidden in her apron pocket, emerged slowly. On her ring finger was a band that Eleanor recognized with a shock that nearly stopped her heart. It was Michael's grandmother's ring, the Whitmore family heirloom, a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds that had been passed down through 4 generations. The ring that was supposed to go to the appropriate girl, the suitable girl, the girl who would understand the weight of the Whitmore name and the responsibilities it carried. "We were married 2 months ago," Michael said, his arms sliding around Maya's waist with protective tenderness, "in a small ceremony in Central Park. I wanted to tell you in person, to introduce you properly." Eleanor's world narrowed to a pinpoint of crystalline focus. The girl she had been condescending to, the server she had dismissed and belittled, was wearing her mother-in-law's ring, was carrying the Whitmore name, was, according to her son, family. The champagne glass slipped from Eleanor's nerveless fingers and shattered against the mahogany floor, sending Dom Perignon and crystal shards across the Persian rug. But she barely heard the sound over the roaring in her ears, the sound of everything she thought she knew about her life crashing down around her. Maya moved instinctively to clean up the mess, but Michael caught her arm gently. "Leave it," he said softly. "That's not your job anymore." And in those words, Eleanor heard the sound of her world changing forever. Maya had believed that love really was enough, that when 2 hearts recognized each other, nothing else mattered. Not background, not money, not the vast chasms that society carved between different kinds of people. She had learned this lesson first from her grandmother, Rosa, who had raised her in a cramped apartment above a bodega in Queens, where the smell of fresh tortillas mixed with the sounds of 3 languages and the dreams of families who had crossed oceans for better lives. Every morning before dawn, Maya would awake to the sound of her grandmother's prayers, whispered in Spanish, while coffee percolated and the radio played soft bachata. Rosa worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices in Manhattan during the day and watching neighborhood children in the evenings. But she never missed a school play, never forgot a parent-teacher conference, never let Maya feel that their circumstances were anything but temporary. "Mara," she would say, her weathered hands cupping Maya's face, "your education is the ladder that will take you where your dreams live. But never forget where you came from, because that is what makes you strong." Maya had climbed that ladder with fierce determination. Valedictorian of her high school class, full scholarship to Barnard, then graduate school at Columbia. She had spent summers working in museum archives, her fingers tracing the brushstrokes of masters, learning to read the stories that painters had embedded in pigment and canvas. Art history wasn't just her field of study, it was her way of understanding how beauty persisted across centuries, how human creativity transcended the boundaries of time and circumstance. The morning routine at La Bernardine began at 6 a.m., 2 hours before the restaurant opened to the public. Maya would arrive in darkness, her Metro card worn smooth from use, her work shoes comfortable and practical. She would change in the employee locker room, a far cry from the gilded spaces where diners would later sip wine that cost more than her monthly rent, and pin her hair back with the same silver bobby pins her grandmother had used. "Good morning, sunshine," Carlos would call out as she entered the prep kitchen. He was the sous chef, a man in his 40s who had worked his way up from dishwasher to his current position through 15 years of 16-hour days. "Ready to serve the masters of the universe?" Maya would smile, tying her apron with practiced efficiency. "Ready as anyone can be to pretend that caviar is worth more than my grandmother's medical bills." The relationship between the kitchen staff and the servers was its own ecosystem, a family bound by shared exhaustion and mutual respect. They looked out for each other, covered each other's mistakes, and shared the tips that made the difference between paying rent on time or explaining to landlords why they needed another week. Maya had been embraced into this family immediately, her easy Spanish with the kitchen staff and her gentle manner with difficult customers, making her a favorite among both colleagues and management. But the work was harder than she had imagined, not because of the physical demands, though 12-hour shifts on her feet were exhausting, but because of the emotional labor required to smile through condescension, to remain gracious in the face of dismissal, to maintain her dignity while being treated as invisible. The first time someone had snapped their fingers at her, Maya had stood frozen for a moment, remembering her grandmother's words about strength. She had taken a deep breath, walked over with a smile, and provided the best service she could. Later, in the employee bathroom, she had allowed herself exactly 2 minutes to cry before returning to work. "You're too good for this place," her friend Letitia would say during their rare evenings off. They would sit in Maya's studio apartment, sharing takeout Chinese food and wine that cost less than what some customers at the restaurant spent on a single glass. "You have a master's degree from Columbia. You could be working at the Met or Guggenheim or—" "I've applied to 17 museums in the past 6 months," Maya would reply, stabbing at her lo mein with more force than necessary. "The art world is smaller than people think and more political than anyone wants to admit. Plus, they pay curator assistants less than I make here." What Maya didn't tell Letitia, what she barely admitted to herself, was how the rejections had begun to wear her down. Form letters thanking her for her interest but informing her that the position had been filled by someone with more experience, or, more often, someone whose last name opened doors that remained closed to girls from Queens with student loans and dreams larger than their bank accounts. Their relationship had developed over months of late-night conversations about art, life, and dreams. Michael had been different from other wealthy customers, genuinely interested in her thoughts, treating her as an equal. The proposal came in her grandmother's kitchen, simple and heartfelt. They'd married quietly in Central Park 2 months ago, wanting to build their foundation before facing his family's inevitable scrutiny. They had honeymooned in Maya's studio apartment, too happy to care that they could barely fit in her twin bed, too in love to notice that the air conditioner didn't work, and the upstairs neighbors seemed to be training for a marathon at 3 a.m. Michael had seemed genuinely content, helping her cook breakfast on the tiny stove, reading the Sunday Times while she graded papers for the art history class she tutored on weekends. "We should tell our parents soon," Maya had said one morning, watching him struggle to fit his long legs under her small kitchen table. Michael's coffee cup had paused halfway to his lips. "I know, I just want to do it right. I want them to see you the way I see you." "And how do you see me?" "As the most remarkable person I've ever met, as my equal in every way that matters, as the woman I'm going to spend the rest of my life loving." Maya had reached across the table to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with her thumb. "Your parents are going to have to accept that this is real, Michael. We can't spend our marriage hiding." "I know," he had said again, catching her hand and pressing it flat against his cheek. "I just need to find the right way to help them understand." Now, standing in the private dining room at Le Bernardin, with Michael's arms around her and his parents staring at her in shocked silence, Maya realized that there had never been a right way. There had only been this moment, this collision of worlds that she had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. She felt Michael's hand tighten around her waist, felt the tremor in his fingers that told her he was just as nervous as she was. But when she looked up at him, saw the love and determination in his eyes, Maya remembered something her grandmother had told her on her wedding day. "Mija, marriage is not about becoming someone else. It's about becoming more yourself, but with a partner who sees all of you and chooses to stay." Maya straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and prepared to show the Whitmores exactly who they were dealing with. The crystal shards from Eleanor's champagne glass caught the light like scattered stars on the Persian rug, each fragment reflecting the stunned faces around the mahogany table. Maya knelt instinctively to begin cleaning the mess, her service training overriding the monumental shift that had just occurred in the room's dynamic. But Michael's hand on her arm stopped her, his touch gentle but firm. "Maya, don't," he said quietly, his voice carrying a new authority that Eleanor had never heard before. "You're not the help here. You're my wife." The word wife seemed to echo in the hushed dining room, bouncing off the velvet-draped walls and settling into the suddenly charged air like a declaration of war. Eleanor remained frozen in her chair, her manicured hands gripping the table's edge so tightly that her knuckles had gone white beneath her diamond rings. Charles recovered first, his decades of business negotiations having taught him to compartmentalize shock in favor of strategic thinking. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled, and extended his hand toward Maya with the kind of formal courtesy he might show a business rival, respectful but distinctly cold. "Maya," he said, his voice carefully modulated, "I suppose congratulations are in order." Maya shook his hand, her grip firm despite the tremor Eleanor could detect in her fingers. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I know this is unexpected." "Unexpected!" Eleanor finally found her voice, the word emerging as a harsh whisper. "Is that what we're calling it?" She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood with a sound like fingernails on silk. "Michael, I need to speak with you. Privately." "Mum, now." The authority in Eleanor's voice was absolute, honed by decades of commanding charity committees and intimidating household staff. It was the voice that had never been denied, that had shaped Michael's childhood with its implicit threat of withdrawn affection. Maya watched as something flickered across her husband's face. Not fear, exactly, but the instinctive response of a child to a parent's displeasure. "Whatever you need to say to me, you can say in front of Maya," Michael replied. But Eleanor caught the slight hesitation before he spoke, the momentary wavering that told her she still held power here. "I don't think that's wise," Eleanor said, her eyes never leaving her son's face. "This is a family matter." "Maya is family now," Michael said, his arm tightening protectively around his wife's waist. "She has every right to be part of this conversation." Eleanor's laugh was sharp as winter wind. "Family? Michael, you've known this girl for what, a few months? You can't seriously expect us to—" "8 months," Maya interrupted quietly, her voice steady despite the obvious tension radiating through her small frame. "We've known each other for 8 months, Mrs. Whitmore." Eleanor turned her full attention to Maya for the first time since the revelation, and her expression could have frozen champagne. "I wasn't speaking to you." The dismissal hung in the air like a slap, but Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly, and Eleanor caught a glimpse of something that made her stomach tighten with unease. It was the look of someone who had faced down bigger bullies than a wealthy woman having a tantrum in an expensive restaurant. "I understand you're shocked," Maya continued, her tone remaining respectful but firm. "But I am part of this family now, whether you approve or not, and I think it would be better for everyone if we could discuss this civilly." "Civilly?" Eleanor's voice rose sharply before she caught herself, glancing around the private dining room as if suddenly remembering where they were. She lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. "You want to talk about civility. You've been serving us for months, watching us, listening to our private conversations, and you didn't think to mention that you were involved with our son?" "Eleanor," Charles warned, recognizing the dangerous edge in his wife's tone. "No, Charles, this is—" She struggled for words, her usual eloquence deserting her in the face of this incomprehensible situation. "This is exactly the kind of manipulation I'd expect from someone in her position." Maya's dark eyes flashed, and for a moment Eleanor saw past the professional composure to the fire beneath. "My position?" Maya's voice remained level, but there was steel in it now. "And what position would that be, Mrs. Whitmore?" Eleanor's smile was razor-thin. "Oh, please, don't pretend this isn't exactly what it looks like. A server who targeted our son, who probably researched his background, his family, his net worth." "Mom, stop." Michael's voice cut through Eleanor's accusations like a blade. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Eleanor turned her attention back to her son, her maternal instincts sharpened to a predatory point. "Michael, darling, I know you think you're in love, but surely you can see how this looks. A waitress with a Columbia degree? How convenient. A girl with student loans and a sick grandmother? How perfectly calculated to appeal to your charitable instincts." The silence that followed was electric. Maya's face had gone pale, but her expression remained composed, even as Eleanor's words found their target. Michael, however, looked as if his mother had physically struck him. "How did you—" she began, then stopped herself. Eleanor's smile widened triumphantly. "Oh, my dear girl, did you think I wouldn't have you investigated the moment I realized my son was involved with the help? I know about your grandmother's medical bills, her citizenship status, your student loans. I know about every job you worked to put yourself through graduate school. I know about every scholarship application, every grant request, every desperate attempt to claw your way up from where you started."
Maya's composure cracked slightly, and Eleanor caught the flash of humiliation in her dark eyes. It was exactly the reaction she had been hoping for, the moment when this presumptuous girl would remember her place and retreat back to where she belonged. But Maya's next words surprised her. "Yes," Maya said simply, "I did all of those things. I worked 3 jobs. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I took care of my grandmother when she got sick, and I chose to continue working here even after I finished my degree because the economy is hard and good jobs are scarce, and I needed to support my family." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was stronger.
I'm not ashamed of any of that, Mrs. Whitmore. Those experiences made me who I am. Eleanor felt her advantage slipping away, and it made her desperate. Desperate people, she had learned in decades of social warfare, said things they might later regret. And who you are, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with disdain, is a gold digger who saw an opportunity and took it. Do you really expect us to believe that you fell in love with Michael's mind, his personality, or did you fall in love with his trust fund? The accusation hit the room like a physical blow. Maya flinched as if she had been struck, and Michael stepped forward, his face flushed with an anger Eleanor had rarely seen in her controlled, diplomatic son. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You will apologize to my wife, right now." Eleanor had pushed too far, and she knew it, but pride and panic made retreat impossible. "I will not apologize for speaking the truth. Michael, this girl has played you. Can't you see that?" "What I see," Michael replied, his voice shaking with suppressed fury, "is my mother being cruel to the woman I love." Charles stepped forward, recognizing that the situation was spiraling beyond recovery. "Perhaps we should all take a moment to—" "No," Maya said quietly, and everyone turned to look at her. Her face was still pale, but her hands were steady as she reached into her apron pocket and withdrew her phone. With deliberate movements, she scrolled through her contacts and placed a call. "Hi, James. It's Maya. I know I'm scheduled until 11, but I need to leave now. Yes, it's a family emergency." She listened for a moment, then nodded. "Thank you. I'll be in tomorrow to discuss my schedule." She hung up and looked directly at Eleanor, her expression calm but implacable. "Mrs. Whitmore, you've made it very clear that you don't consider me worthy of your son or your family. I can't change your mind about that, at least not tonight, but I can control how much of your disrespect I'm willing to endure." She began untying her apron with precise movements, and Eleanor realized with growing alarm that she was losing control of the narrative she had tried to construct. Maya folded the apron neatly and set it on the table, her movements dignified despite the emotional turbulence swirling around them. "Michael, I'm going home. Your parents clearly need time to process this news, and I need time to decide whether I want to be part of a family that sees me as a threat rather than a daughter." The word daughter hit Eleanor like a physical blow. In all her fury and shock, she hadn't considered that this girl, this woman, would expect to be treated as family, to be welcomed into the intimate circle of their lives with open arms and maternal affection. "Maya, wait," Michael said, reaching for her hand. "We came here to tell them together. We should leave together." Maya looked at him with infinite tenderness, and Eleanor caught a glimpse of the connection between them that went beyond anything mercenary or calculated. The way Maya touched Michael's face, the way she looked at him as if he were something precious and fragile, it was either the performance of a lifetime or genuine love. "Your mother is right about one thing," Maya said softly, her voice meant for Michael but loud enough for his parents to hear. "This looks bad. A server and a customer, a poor girl and a rich man. People will always question my motives, and some of them will be your family." She glanced at Eleanor, her expression sad rather than angry. "I knew that going in, but I thought your parents might be willing to get to know me before judging me." She kissed Michael gently, a gesture so tender and self-conscious that Eleanor felt an unwelcome stab of recognition. She had seen that exact expression on her son's face before, when he was 7 years old and brought home a stray kitten, loving it completely, despite knowing his parents would never let him keep it. If you've made it this far in the story, you're invested in seeing how this family navigates their shocking revelation. Show your support by hitting the like button and sharing this with someone who loves dramatic, true-to-life stories. There's still more to come. "I'll be at home," Maya told him. "Take your time, say whatever you need to say."
She walked toward the door with her head high, her server's training evident in the way she moved, graceful, unobtrusive, professionally invisible even in the most emotionally charged moments. But just before she reached the door, she turned back. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. I never researched your family's net worth. I didn't know who Michael was when we met. I fell in love with a man who treated me like an equal, who listened when I talked about art and wine and books, who spent 3 hours in a Queen's emergency room holding my grandmother's hand when she had chest pains. Her voice caught slightly, but she continued. If you think those qualities can be bought, then you don't know your son very well. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving the three Whitmores alone with the weight of what had just transpired. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, broken finally by Michael's voice, raw with emotion. I can't believe you investigated her. I can't believe you would violate her privacy like that. Eleanor sank back into her chair, suddenly feeling every one of her 61 years. Michael, darling, we had to know. You had to know what? Whether the woman I love is worthy of your approval? Michael's voice was rising, his careful composure finally cracking. Whether she meets your standards for what a Whitmore wife should be? Charles moved toward his son, his business instincts telling him to de-escalate before permanent damage was done. Son, your mother is just concerned about what, Dad? About her reputation? About what the country club ladies will say when they find out I married a waitress? Michael laughed bitterly. God forbid they discover that I fell in love with someone who actually works for a living. Eleanor's temper flared again. Don't you dare lecture us about working for a living. Your father and I have built everything we have. By managing other people's money, Michael shot back. Maya creates value with her own hands, her own mind. The accusation stung because it carried a grain of truth that Eleanor had spent years avoiding. Her charitable work, her social commitments, her carefully curated life. How much of it actually mattered beyond maintaining her family's position in society? That's unfair, Charles said quietly. Our work, our investments, they provide jobs for thousands of people. The foundation your mother runs has funded art programs in schools across the city. Art programs, Michael repeated, his voice heavy with irony. You fund art programs, but you can't see the value in a woman who dedicated her life to studying art. You create scholarships for underprivileged students, but you look down on someone who needed those scholarships to succeed. Eleanor felt the ground shifting beneath her carefully constructed worldview. Michael, surely you can see how this looks. I see a woman I love who's being judged unfairly. A customer whose last name she certainly recognized? Eleanor replied, but her voice lacked her earlier conviction. Michael pulled out his phone, scrolling through something with sharp, angry movements. You want to know how calculating Maya is? Here. He turned the screen toward his parents. Her Instagram, from 8 months ago. Tell me, what do you see? Eleanor looked reluctantly at the images. Maya in a graduation cap and gown, beaming beside an elderly woman who could only be her grandmother. Maya volunteered at what looked like a community center, reading to children. Maya at a museum exhibit standing next to a painting with an expression of pure joy. I don't see a single photo of expensive restaurants or wealthy neighborhoods. I don't see any evidence that she was hunting for rich men to target. What I see is someone who loves art, who cares about her community, who works hard and takes care of her family. Charles studied the photos with the same analytical approach he brought to business decisions. She seems genuine, he admitted reluctantly. Eleanor snatched the phone from her husband's hands, scrolling through more images. Maya helping her grandmother with what looked like physical therapy exercises. Maya at a library, surrounded by books and papers, clearly studying. Maya with friends at small, casual gatherings, birthday parties in tiny apartments, picnics in local parks. It was the Instagram account of someone whose life was rich in relationships and experiences but poor in material wealth. Someone who found joy in simple pleasures and meaningful work. Someone who, Eleanor was forced to admit, seemed to have no interest in flaunting wealth or status because she had none to flaunt.
"This doesn't change anything," Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It changes everything," Michael replied. "It proves that you judged her based on your own prejudices, not on any actual evidence." The door opened again, and James Hartwell appeared, his expression carefully neutral. "Forgive the interruption, but we wanted to ensure everything was satisfactory with your service this evening." Eleanor looked up at the sommelier, suddenly seeing him differently. How many times had she dined here without really looking at the staff? How many times had she received impeccable service while treating the servers as invisible? "James," she said slowly, "the young woman who was serving us tonight, Maya, what can you tell us about her?" James's expression softened slightly. "Maya Rodriguez? She's one of our finest servers, ma'am. Incredibly knowledgeable about wine and food, speaks 4 languages, always volunteers for the most difficult customers because she has such a gift for making people feel comfortable." Eleanor felt another piece of her carefully constructed narrative crumble. 4 languages? "Spanish, English, Italian, and French," James confirmed. "She actually helped us design our new wine pairing menu for the spring season. Her background in art history gives her a unique perspective on the cultural context of different regions." Charles leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. "She designed your wine menu?" "Collaborated on it, yes, sir. Maya has an exceptional palate and a deep understanding of how food and wine reflect the history and culture of their origins. We've been trying to convince her to pursue sommelier certification, but she's been focused on finding a position in her field." Eleanor felt as if she were seeing a completely different person than the gold-digging opportunist she had imagined. Why hasn't she found a museum position with her credentials? James hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal about an employee's personal situation. "I probably shouldn't speak for her, but the art world can be quite insular. Without family connections or powerful mentors, even the most qualified candidates sometimes struggle to break in." The words hit Eleanor like a revelation. Family connections, powerful mentors, the exact advantages that had smoothed every path her son had ever walked, the invisible network of privilege that she had always taken for granted. "We should go," Michael said, standing abruptly. "Maya's right. You both need time to think about this." "Michael, wait," Eleanor said, panic rising in her chest. She could see her son slipping away, could feel the foundation of their relationship cracking under the weight of her own prejudice. Perhaps we could have dinner again, all of us, when emotions aren't running so high." Michael paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "It depends entirely on whether you're willing to treat my wife with the respect she deserves. She's not—" Eleanor began, then stopped herself. Maya was his wife, whether Eleanor accepted it or not. The marriage had happened, the ring was on her finger, and no amount of outrage was going to change that reality. "We'll try," Charles said quietly, speaking for both of them. "We'll try to do better." Michael nodded curtly and left, leaving his parents alone with their shattered assumptions and the growing realization that they had just made a catastrophic mistake. Eleanor sank back into her chair, her head in her hands. "Charles, what have we done?" Charles sat heavily beside her, looking older than she had seen him in years.
We've done exactly what I swore we'd never do. We've become the kind of people who judge others based on their bank accounts instead of their character. But she's a waitress, Charles. Our son married a waitress. Our son married a woman with a master's degree from Columbia who speaks 4 languages and designs wine menus for one of the city's finest restaurants. Our son married someone who loves him enough to walk away from a confrontation rather than escalate it. Our son married someone who showed more grace under pressure tonight than we did. Eleanor looked around the empty dining room, taking in the opulent surroundings that had always represented success and achievement to her. Now they felt hollow, like a beautiful stage set with no substance behind it. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. Charles took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "We start by admitting we were wrong, and then we figure out how to earn our son's forgiveness, and his wife's." The word wife still felt foreign in Eleanor's mouth, but she was beginning to understand that foreign didn't necessarily mean wrong. It just meant something different from what she had expected, what she had planned, what she had thought she wanted for her son.
The question now was whether she was brave enough to expand her definition of family to include someone who had never asked for their wealth or status, but had somehow earned their son's heart through the simple act of seeing him for who he truly was. Meanwhile, across the city in a small studio apartment in Queens, Maya sat on her narrow bed holding her phone, staring at a text from Michael. "I'm sorry. I love you. We'll figure this out together." She typed back, "I love you too, but we can't build a marriage in opposition to your family. They have to want me there." As she hit send, Maya touched the emerald ring on her finger, the Whitmore family heirloom that represented generations of tradition and expectation. She had worn it with pride for 2 months, but tonight was the first time it had felt heavy on her hand. Outside her window, the sounds of Queens at night filtered through the thin walls. Sirens in the distance, late-night conversations in Spanish and English and languages she couldn't identify, the rumble of the subway carrying tired workers home from jobs that paid just enough to survive another day. This was her world, the place that had shaped her values and her dreams. But it was also Michael's world now too, by choice, just as his world had become hers. The question was whether their families could learn to see past their differences to the love that had brought them together. Maya fell asleep that night still wearing her wedding ring, but for the first time since the ceremony, she wondered if love would be enough to bridge the gap between who she was and who the Whitmores needed her to be. The morning after the disastrous dinner, Eleanor awoke before dawn with a headache that felt like divine punishment for the previous evening's behavior. She lay in her king-sized bed, watching the first pale light of sunrise filter through the silk curtains of their Fifth Avenue penthouse, and tried to understand how everything had gone so spectacularly wrong. Charles was already awake beside her, sitting up against the headboard with his laptop balanced on his knees, his reading glasses reflecting the screen's blue glow. He had been working when she finally fell asleep at 2 a.m., and he appeared to have been working ever since. "What are you looking at?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the emotional strain of the previous night. "Maya Rodriguez," he replied without looking up. "And before you say anything, this isn't an investigation, it's research." Eleanor sat up, pulling her cashmere robe tighter around her shoulders. "What kind of research?" Charles turned the laptop toward her, and Eleanor found herself looking at an academic paper titled Sacred and Secular: The Evolution of Religious Imagery in Renaissance Art. The author was listed as Maya E. Rodriguez, and the publication was the Columbia Journal of Art History. "She published this 2 years ago," Charles said quietly. "It's been cited 17 times by other scholars. I've been reading it for the past hour. And Eleanor, it's brilliant." Eleanor squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of the academic language and complex arguments. "I don't understand most of this." "Neither did I, at first. But look here." Charles scrolled down to a section where Maya analyzed a lesser-known painting by Caravaggio.
She's arguing that the artist embedded subtle critiques of church corruption into his religious paintings, and she's using X-ray analysis and historical documents to prove it. This isn't just art appreciation, Eleanor. This is serious scholarship. Eleanor felt an uncomfortable twisting in her stomach as she skimmed the dense paragraphs filled with references to primary sources, technical analyses, and theoretical frameworks. This was the work of someone who had dedicated years to understanding not just what art looked like, but what it meant, how it reflected the societies that created it, and why it mattered across centuries. "There's more," Charles continued, clicking to another tab. "She gave a lecture at the Met last year, Wine, Art, and Cultural Identity in Medieval Europe. It was part of their Young Scholar series. Look at the attendance numbers." The lecture had drawn over 300 people, and the comments on the museum's website were glowing. "Insightful and engaging," one read. "Miss Rodriguez brings art history to life with her passionate and accessible approach." Another, "Finally someone who can make the connection between historical context and contemporary relevance without talking down to the audience." Eleanor's carefully constructed image of Maya as a calculating opportunist was crumbling with each new piece of evidence. This wasn't the resume of someone looking for an easy way out of poverty. This was the life's work of someone genuinely passionate about her field, someone who had been building a reputation in academic circles long before she met Michael. "Why are you showing me this?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because we were wrong," Charles said simply. "Completely, utterly wrong. And because our son is right. We judged her based on her job, not her qualifications or her character."
Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, expecting to see something from her personal assistant about the day's schedule, but instead found a message from Michael. "Maya and I would like to invite you and Dad to dinner at our apartment tomorrow night, if you're interested in getting to know your daughter-in-law." The words daughter-in-law hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Not my wife or Maya, but daughter-in-law, a deliberate reminder of the relationship Maya now held in their family structure, whether Eleanor was ready to accept it or not. "Charles," she said, showing him the message, "what do we do?" Charles read the text twice before responding. "We say yes, and we spend today figuring out how to be better than we were last night." But saying yes turned out to be the easy part. The hard part was sitting in Maya's studio apartment the following evening, trying to reconcile the elegant, sophisticated woman serving them homemade paella with the calculating gold digger Eleanor had convinced herself she was dealing with. The apartment was tiny, probably smaller than Eleanor's walk-in closet, but it had been transformed into something warm and welcoming. Candles flickered on every available surface, their light reflecting off framed prints of famous paintings. Not expensive originals, but museum reproductions, carefully chosen and beautifully arranged. Books were everywhere. Art history texts, novels in multiple languages, poetry collections with worn spines that suggested frequent reading. Maya moved through the small space with practiced efficiency, checking the paella on the tiny stove while setting out wine glasses. "I hope you don't mind eating in the kitchen," Maya said. "There's not really space for a formal dining room." "It's charming," Charles said, and Eleanor was surprised to realize he meant it. Her husband, who owned buildings throughout Manhattan, who had dined with presidents and foreign dignitaries, seemed genuinely comfortable perched on one of Maya's mismatched kitchen chairs. Michael appeared with a small vase of flowers. "From the bodega downstairs," he said, kissing Maya's cheek. "The paella smells incredible," Eleanor said, surprising herself by meaning it. "Did you learn to cook in school?" Maya smiled, and Eleanor caught a glimpse of the warmth that had clearly captivated her son. "My grandmother taught me. She said that food is how we show love when words aren't enough." She paused, her hands stilling on the wooden spoon. "She also said that sharing a meal with someone is the first step towards understanding them." The comment hung in the air, neither accusation nor plea, just a simple statement of belief. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized Maya was offering them a chance to start over, despite everything that had happened at the restaurant. Your grandmother sounds wise, Charles said. We'd love to meet her. She'd like that, Maya replied. She's been asking about Michael's family since we got married. She has very definite opinions about parents who don't want to know their children's spouses. Eleanor winced. I imagine she does. Maya began ladling the paella onto plates, the rice perfectly golden and studded with shrimp, mussels, and chunks of chorizo. She told me that when she married my grandfather, his family didn't approve either. They thought she was too dark, too poor, too uneducated. But she said love has a way of changing people's minds if they're willing to let it. She set a plate in front of Eleanor, and their eyes met for a moment. In Maya's gaze, Eleanor saw not anger or resentment, but something that looked like hope. It was more devastating than any accusation could have been. Maya, Eleanor began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the apology that was lodged in her throat like a physical object. It's okay, Maya said softly. I understand why you reacted the way you did. If I had a son, I'd probably be protective too. It wasn't protectiveness, Eleanor admitted, the words scraping against her pride. It was prejudice, and I'm ashamed of it. The silence that followed was broken by Charles clearing his throat. Maya, I hope you'll forgive us for having you investigated. It was an invasion of your privacy, and it was wrong. Maya sat down at the table, her movements graceful despite the obvious tension. I know about the investigation. Mrs. Chan mentioned a private investigator was asking about me. She took a sip of wine, her hand steady. I didn't get angry. I was just sad that you felt you couldn't ask me directly. What did the investigator tell you? Nothing I didn't already know, Maya said with a slight smile. All things I would have told you if you had asked.
Michael reached across to take Maya's hand, and Eleanor watched her son's entire posture soften. She had seen Michael in relationships before, polite arrangements that felt more like business mergers than romances. This was different. This was the way Charles had looked at her when they were young. We read about your work, Charles said. Your publications, your lecture at the Met, you're remarkably accomplished. Maya's cheeks flushed. I shouldn't have to present credentials to prove I'm worthy of loving your son. The statement hit Eleanor with revelatory force. Maya was right. Love wasn't about credentials or financial statements. It was about the way Michael's eyes lit up when Maya laughed, the way they moved around the tiny kitchen like practiced dancers. You're absolutely right, Eleanor said quietly, and I owe you a real apology. Maya looked at her expectantly. I was wrong about you. I let prejudices cloud my judgment, and I said cruel, unfair things. You didn't deserve that. Maya's eyes softened, tears gathering. Thank you. That means more than you know. My job is honest work, Maya said, steel in her voice. I'm not ashamed of it. You shouldn't be, Charles said quietly. We were wrong to treat it as lesser. I'd like to meet her, Eleanor said impulsively. Your grandmother. I'd like to thank her for raising such a remarkable granddaughter. Tears spilled over and Maya wiped her eyes. She loved that. She's been worried Michael's family would never accept me. We want to accept you, Eleanor said, surprised to realize she meant it completely. If our son has found happiness, we should be celebrating, not questioning. Michael finally spoke. I love her because she makes me want to be better. She challenges me, supports me, believes in me. She's the smartest, most compassionate person I've ever met, and she chose me despite my complicated family baggage. We're not baggage, Eleanor protested, then caught herself. Well, perhaps we are. Perhaps we need to work on that. Maya laughed, a sound like silver bells filling the apartment. Everyone has family complications. The question is whether you're willing to work through them together. We are, Charles said firmly. We want to be part of your lives, if you'll have us. Of course, your family now. The words settled between them, no longer threatening, but full of possibility. Eleanor looked around the tiny apartment, the carefully chosen books, the lovingly prepared meal, the way her son and his wife looked at each other as if they had found home. For the first time in her life,
Eleanor wondered if wealth and status weren't the most important measures of success. Perhaps success was sitting in a cramped kitchen in Queens, sharing paella with people who loved you. "Maya," Eleanor said, "I've been on the Metropolitan Museum Board for 15 years. We're always looking for qualified candidates for our curatorial program. If you're interested, I'd be happy to make an introduction." Maya's face went still. "Mrs. Whitmore, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want charity. If I get a position at the Met, I want it because I'm qualified." I felt a flush of respect. "It wouldn't be charity. I've read your work. You're more than qualified. I'd just make sure your resume gets seen by the right people. I don't want to succeed because of connections." "Maya," Charles said gently, "connections are how every industry works. Eleanor would open doors, but you'd walk through them on your own merits." "I'd like to think about it," Maya said finally. "Thank you." As they cleared dishes, Eleanor watched Maya move through her kitchen with economical grace, washing glasses by hand, storing leftovers in mismatched containers, a life lived carefully, without waste. This was what real love looked like. Not grand gestures, but quiet intimacy. The way Maya handed Michael a dish towel, the way he knew where she kept the wine glasses. "Thank you for giving us a second chance," Eleanor said at the door. Maya hugged her. "Family isn't always easy, but it's worth the effort." 3 months later, Eleanor stood in the Metropolitan Museum's European Paintings Gallery, watching Maya guide donors through a Renaissance exhibition. Her daughter-in-law moved between paintings with the confidence of someone who had found her natural element.
If you look closely at Caravaggio's The Musicians, Maya was saying, you'll notice the central figure looking directly at us, breaking the fourth wall in a way that was revolutionary. Caravaggio wasn't just painting a scene, he was creating a dialogue between art and observer. Eleanor watched the donors' faces, seeing the same captivation she had witnessed at family dinners. Maya had a gift for making complex ideas accessible, for finding human stories in centuries-old canvas and pigment. The Met position had materialized quickly. Eleanor's introduction had opened the door, but Maya's interview, portfolio, and innovative community outreach ideas had secured the job on merit. She was now an associate curator with a focus on Renaissance studies and public education. Maya had transformed their family as much as they'd supported her. She joined Eleanor for weekly gallery visits, helped Charles with his foundation's art committee, even learned traditional Irish cooking from their housekeeper. The integration hadn't been without challenges. Eleanor's social circle required delicate navigation, but Maya had handled each awkward introduction with such grace that even skeptical society matrons were eventually won over. As the exhibition reception concluded, Eleanor found herself standing beside Maya, looking at a small Vermeer. "Thank you," Maya said quietly, "for everything, for apologizing, for the introduction, for accepting me." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, "for being patient with us, for loving Michael so completely, for showing me that family isn't about where you come from, but about where you're willing to go together." Maya squeezed her hand. "Your grandmother, the one I've heard stories about, I think she would have understood that." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. Her grandmother had been an Irish immigrant who'd married into society, facing her own prejudices. "She would have loved you immediately. She was smarter than I am. It took me far too long to see what was right in front of me." "But you got there," Maya said simply. "That's what matters." Later, as Eleanor watched Michael arrive to walk Maya home, seeing them embrace with the easy affection of deep partnership, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had nearly lost your son over pride. Instead, she had gained a daughter. "Ready to go, Mom?" Michael asked, using the warm familiarity that had returned to his voice. "Yes," Eleanor said. meaning so much more than just leaving the museum. I'm ready. Thank you for sticking with us through this emotional journey of prejudice, love, and redemption. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more compelling tales about the power of love to change hearts and minds. What would you have done in Eleanor's position? Let us know in the comments below.